get when you combine a world-class EMS physician and medical director
I speak pretty good English for a guy from Detroit.
with an EMS veteran and all-around nice guy.
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Oh, that's so good. Oh, my God.
Well, you get the EMS show. Taking it to the people, here's your host, Dr. Ritu Sani and Mike Vercast.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the EMS show. Mike Vercast, Dr. Ritu Sani on a beautiful Thursday evening. So no matter where you may be watching. Oh, wait, who says that? Colin Coward? Did I rip Colin Coward off? Where you may be watching? And, you know, his little spiel. Is that him?
I stopped watching Colin Coward when he left Portland. So
I think that was his thing. But he had this little spiel that he said. Anyway, it is great to see you guys. Thanks for taking a few minutes to join us on this beautiful Thursday evening. We have a very special guest, and I'm super excited. And I know Ritu is very excited. And so let's just get right into some introductions. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. So much to Bill Toon's delight. Oh, we just lost him.
we just lost our guest.
He'll be back. Maybe we should just wait. Maybe we should just wait until he comes back. That's pretty good. Yeah, well, welcome to the EMS show.
There he is. We were having some technical issues earlier, so that
It was all
yeah. Well, Michigan and
Let's
Iowa just went
hope
into
so.
overtime, but Michigan's now losing, so I'm probably okay to stop paying attention to that. But yeah, let's talk to our. I'll go ahead and introduce our guest, Dr. Ron Roth, and I have known Ron for 30 years.
Wow.
Ron was an attending when I was a resident at the University of Pittsburgh in 19. So I've known Ron since I was a little baby intern, and then I did, as you guys know, did my EMS fellowship there also. So Ron was sort of a direct mentor, teacher, tutor. For me,
I want to hear about the times when he disciplined you.
When did I get disciplined?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure you must have done some boneheaded move.
Oh, I did lots of boneheaded moves, but I never got disciplined, I don't think.
It was you could do whatever you want.
The sound problem is back.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's back again. Yeah, super, and your signal thing is all wacky again. Anyway, that's all right. We'll see if we can push through it, and we troubleshot this. I want everyone to know we were prepared. We did 30 minutes of planning. We did pre-planning. We did organizational. We did a tech check. And sometimes, no matter what, it just ain't gonna work out, right? Like, what are you gonna do? Which is really a bummer because
You want me to?
Do you want to try to log out and back in again like you did before? Maybe that'll work. Ritu and I, turns out we can talk about everything and put this off as long as possible. So that's not too big of a deal. If you want to, we really want this to work. So
yeah, and this will all be edited out of the actual podcast too. So, but
there he goes.
There he goes. Technology.
But everyone, you can just hang tight. It's okay. He'll be back. We had it fixed once. Anyway, what's going on in Oregon, dude?
Well, in Oregon, let's see. We just started our protocol development committee, which we talk about.
I do miss that.
We never did go through all of the protocol changes.
No, we were supposed to. Maybe that'll be our next episode this month. We'll go through the protocol. We touched on a little bit. Yeah.
Didn't hear you there, Ron. Say that again. This is live television at its finest.
Oh, he's typing now that he can't hear us.
You can't hear us. We can hear you typing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me? Guys, for some reason.
Our corporate sponsors would be pissed if we had any.
Yeah. Well,
So still not working for you there, Ron?
So if Ron can't hear us at all, he can't hear us. He logged back out again.
Yeah. Anyway, well, that's a bummer. Well, hopefully we can get this figured out. And thanks for hanging in there with us for a little bit through some technical stuff. Hey, what are you going to do? You know, that's a bummer. You know, I was just busting your chops too about getting disciplined.
Oh, well, I didn't know
he was.
Dude, that was 30 years ago. I don't even remember. So maybe I did get disciplined and Ron remembered and I didn't.
It's so funny. So funny.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
I was
we
a
were
little
talking
mouthy
before
back
we
then.
got started.
What?
What's that?
Say that?
I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I said I was a little mouthy back then.
Oh, that's weird.
Hard to believe. I know.
Weren't. Mouthy like a back talker? No,
not really a back talker.
You're too nice to be that way, especially when you didn't know a lot. When you were a resident, you know, you're finding your like. I could never see you being sort of smarty. There's Jamie McDaniel. Hi, Jamie. Are you having trouble hearing me now, or are you just being quiet, or what are you doing?
Who, me? No, I was looking to see if Ron had texted me. I can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. I was like, I got left in the dust here. This is some wild shit we got going on here.
Yeah, I mean, Ron had to get permission from the NFL to be on our show.
Literally had to get permission from the NFL. Yeah. Ed says it's just like the FAA thing. Yeah. Now we're getting screwed with.
That's right. Well, because we're a threat. So
why does that say?
What else is going on in Oregon? You know, it's just did I tell you that we banished diversion for 2 weeks?
So like nobody could go on divert?
Nobody could go on divert.
And so how'd that go?
It went well in some ways, and there were a few days that were just like awful. Because we told hospitals that they couldn't go on divert, but we didn't turn off the functionality in the computer. So hospitals, a couple hospitals still would go on divert in the notification system, and then would and then I would call them. I would talk to their ED directors.
Give them the what for?
And kind of try to figure out what's going on. And meanwhile, all the other ED directors in the region were calling me to say, why are they allowed to go on divert? And I'm like, I'm trying to figure it out. So, because I have the authority, I have the actual capability to just go in and take them off. But I was, not really I wouldn't do that. I did it once, but so yeah, that was, but other than hospitals' behavior early on being like kind of weird about it, once it kind of got settled in, it was great. But we only did it for 2 weeks because we were having too much.
And was this a situation where everybody was essentially like everyone was red, and so that made it nobody red? Was that kind of the idea? It was like everybody's screwed, let's just be screwed together, or what?
I mean, that was part of it. I mean, that was no, that was it. So everybody was red all the time. And we were doing this thing in Portland that we did for years called active zone management.
Yeah.
So the idea was if 3 hospitals in a region, if all the we have our place split up into various zones,
Right.
and if the hospitals in a zone, all of them went diversion at the same time, then our online medical control trauma resource function would then divvy up those patients, you know. And the whole thought process was, well, everybody's going to be on divert for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So let's just divvy up like one round of patients so that nobody gets slammed with 3 patients or 4 patients, depending on. But what was happened was everybody was on divert all the time. And so we finally said, no, you can't do that anymore. And we were working all along to change it anyway, but it because of staffing shortages and all kinds of problems, we just decided to just unilaterally implement it without a problem.
Huh.
I can hear Ron typing.
Yep.
He cannot hear us. His picture looks
Picture's
great,
good. Network
and his
connection's
sound
good.
is great.
I'm going to see if I can intervene here. Yeah, you got it. I'll let you do that. Yeah, there's lots of people typing. It's an active stream this time. So Ritu is going to provide IT management. I wonder if it's just a matter of it's not picking up his microphone that he's supposed to be using or something like that, because it was all hunky-dory before. Ginger asked me what bourbon I was drinking, and I typed it in the chat. And by the way, so while he's figuring this out, apparently Jack Daniel's Bonded was the number 1 for 2022, and it's pretty wild. It's pretty good, but it's hard to believe that a Jack like the number 1 bourbon of all the bourbons. So that's pretty cool. So I ended up getting a bottle of that a while back. Sat on my shelf for a long time and figured, why not break it open? Oh, by the way, Lisa Murray died. That was breaking news. So she did not survive her cardiac arrest.
She just died, huh?
Yeah.
I saw that she had a cardiac arrest this morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Steve says Maine can call diversion, but EMS can still go that way. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of that way as well. We tried to encourage them to not go sort of on divert, but any critical airway, bad stuff, everybody's open. And then like what he was talking about is there comes a time where everybody is on divert. So that means nobody's on divert, right? And so it's just sort of back to normal operation. But yeah, the active zone management was good, and it would relieve sort of the pressure from these certain areas, right? So we had sort of the eastern, the western, and the central. So if east is on divert, well then we can absorb those calls in the other area. Sucks for the crews because now you're driving clear across town. Sucks for patients, sucks for everybody, but at least it gives them a chance to get the people out of the hallway, hopefully, right? Or whatever the idea is, and get them back. And then ultimately, but it's really up to them to get off of that. Because basically what they're doing is we're going, okay, is this hospital green? And they'll be like, now they're on zone management. Okay. Well, who's the next one up? Well, it's this hospital. Okay, cool. Well, if someone's not going in there and actively managing that, damn good and well, at least this is my thought.
Yeah. And the challenge was too, in our system, like every hospital is not the same, and every hospital's ED is not the same. And so what would happen was like in the zone that the hospital I work at is in, there's 3 hospitals, 2 are big and 1's tiny. And what would happen in the active zone management is like all of our patients would end up at the tiny hospital. And so the poor tiny hospital was getting slammed. But then we would still get patients, and our nurses would get really mad. Why are we getting a patient if we're on divert? So John and I, and then we were running into too much. We are having staffing problems in EMS. I know you find that hard to believe. And we just decided that, and we were getting this triple pandemic peak of flu, COVID, RSV, and we said, no one can go on divert anymore. And from a crew perspective, I talked to my crews and they were like, perfect. We just say, where do you want to go, patient? And that's where we take them. And there was no like shuffling around. So I think we have Ron now back. Do we? Oh,
now we can't hear. Now we
now
can't
we
hear
can't
you.
hear you at all.
Go do that same thing Ritu had you do, but check your microphone and make sure that your correct microphone is selected. Because I know sometimes in these settings, for some reason, it'll select like your speaker as your microphone, and that just don't work. So see if you can mess around with that for a sec. But yeah,
Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
there you go.
Yep, we can hear you good.
We should talk fast before this goes hell.
So having said that, Ritu, let me do this real quick. Welcome to the EMS show. Mike Verkesh, Ritu Sani, Dr. Ron Roth. I want Ritu to do a great introduction because this is a cool connection.
All right.
So anyway,
well,
go for it.
Yeah. So Ron is a professor of emergency medicine at University of Pittsburgh and is the medical director for Pittsburgh EMS. And when I was a resident 30 years ago, 29 years ago, 19, Ron was one of my attendings. At that time, he was MD2, not MD1. And I was MD 59 and
still is.
And so Ron, I did my residency there. I did a 2-year fellowship there, and Ron was there the whole time. And even though Ron was MD2, Ron really ran the whole show at that time. We knew that. We all knew that. I a lot about just kind of the nuts and bolts of being a medical director, kind of how do you, so being a medical director can be a real grind. And Ron just kind of always did it with a smile. And was just a great example on that. And I will just say that EMS is full of characters and big personalities. And Ron Roth is the nicest man I've ever worked with in my life. Yeah, no, I mean that with all sincerity. So I really appreciate you coming on, and we wanted to talk a little bit about specifically event medicine because of your connections with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Sorry that we didn't make the playoffs this year, but I'm glad that Tomlin at least did not go below 500. But when I was a resident a bajillion years ago and a fellow, we staffed the game, if you will, the fans, but there was never any kind of presence on the field. I think one time a guy a year ahead of me, you remember Mike Sullivan?
Sure.
Stood on the field for a game and got us in trouble for a while. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that.
I thought we would, given the events, many of you some of you know that I'm a big football fan, and there was a big event last week where a player had a cardiac arrest on the field of play during a game. That player, Damar Hamlin, is now home. And I thought it would be cool to bring Ron in to talk a little bit about just kind of how they do event medicine specifically to the NFL and kind of what all happens. So I'm going to pitch it back to Mike to ask the first question now.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, one of the things that intrigues me is maybe you can shed a little light on this, but has there always been physicians on the sideline at NFL games or paramedics, or is that sort of a newer thing last 30 years or so?
So the teams have always had physicians, but not emergency medicine. In 2004, the players union said there has to be a physician on the field that can intubate, which is sort of a very narrow thing to have. And since I was the medical director of the marathon, they thought for sure I was a sports medicine interest person. So they said, "Can you do the Steelers?" And I said, "Of course." As it turns out, it's called the airway management physician. And really, if you look narrowly, you would just intubate, but really the decision comes, should you intubate? And as an emergency physician, and most of us are, it really emerged to the consultant that helps with the emergency action plan. So each team has an emergency action plan in case there's an emergency at the stadium, at their training facility, and they work out different scenarios. More recently, the NFL has said, here are the 7 scenarios you need to practice. And so as the emergency physician, I looked at it and said, wow, this is going to be interesting. So it's obviously spinal cord injury, but they added more recently truncal trauma with hypotension, which I thought was cool. There's cardiac arrest, concussions, and it's really emergency medicine on the field. So it's cool. I have the advantage that as medical director of the city of Pittsburgh, it's my paramedics. Well, I shouldn't say my paramedics, but I'm medical director of the paramedics on the field. So I know everyone. And that's not what happens at many stadiums. So I am very lucky that when something happens, I know everyone. But can you imagine if you're the airway physician, you've never worked with any of the medics before, and those medics happen to be medics that just do interfacility transports between nursing homes, you're, to put it nicely, screwed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I and not to interrupt, but sort of to make your point, I was at a professional basketball game where there was a cardiac arrest in the stands, and
I was at that same game.
I thought you were, and I know Dr. Daya was, and I know there was a core group of sort of locals there, like our little group or whatever, and kind of that scenario kind of played out. Now there is an element of 911 response and stuff like that, but it makes a huge difference, and it's almost they would be such at a disadvantage being inserted into this scenario in which your whole on-field team has been training for, and then they just kind of get plopped in. That could be a real challenge. So yeah, I think in that regard, you are certainly, and I think that's pretty awesome. One of the things we talked about kind of while we were pre-gaming, no pun intended, but pretty cool, was there's sort of 2 separate groups that respond, right? You have your on-field team, and I'm assuming is there a group of you? How many of you, or how many are on your team on the field ready to respond to a player or an official emergency?
Yeah, there's probably a total of 30 physicians on the field with orthopods, internal medicine, but for our emergency, and actually some of the teams have emergency medicine physicians, but there's really the airway management physician, and then on the opposite side, something called the visiting team medical liaison, who is the liaison for the visiting team.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so they're emergency medicine too. It's either me or one of my colleagues. And what the NFL, to their credit, we have before each game, 60 minutes before each game, all the medical people, including the paramedics, get in a circle, introduce themselves, and we say specifically who is running the cardiac arrest. And we'll say the VTML is running the cardiac arrest, running the show, and the airway management will, work with the medics with procedures. So it's amazingly pre-planned, and our medics are there. They understand. We have medics on each sideline for this.
So one of the things, when a team comes and plays at Pittsburgh, you provide the medical for all teams, everyone that's on the field.
Yes. So the airway management is for everyone. As the visiting team, I'm on the visiting team sideline, and the hardest part is not cheering because I'm supposed to be neutral. But if they would have an issue, not an airway issue, like a player breaks a leg and they need pain medication, or if they have to go to the hospital, that's what I coordinate. But if the big one happens, then both the visiting team doc, which could be me, and then the opposite, the airway management, you'd have 2 emergency medicine docs and 4 paramedics, 6 trainers, neurosurgeons, orthopods, internal medicine docs. So,
and do you know the history? I've heard some stories, but do you know the history of why the union initially asked for that airway doc?
I'm assuming there was an event. Now the doc, that's the doc for the players union, is Tom Mayer, who is an emergency medicine physician. So, we're really inbred. There's another doc that helps coordinate what we do on the NFL, and he's emergency medicine, and so we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of cases, because I know the Lions may have been involved in one of them, but I think there were a couple of cases where there was an airway. There was a player, I think, where there was an airway issue after a spinal cord injury. And I think that was sort of what led to some of that discussion. And it was like in the early 2000s. So I know there was a patient that was intubated. I mean, a player that was intubated on scene at one point.
So up until last year, there were no players intubated. And then last year, a player was intubated. Up until this year, there were no cardiac arrests. Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen next year.
So, and what are you said there were 7 scenarios. You said there was cardiac arrest, spinal cord injury. What do you mean by truncal injury?
So you can imagine a player could get hit, let's say, in the left upper quadrant with a helmet. And then they're sitting on the sidelines and going, my belly hurts. Or they may say nothing, but they stand up and then drop over because they're hypotensive.
Right.
The importance of recognize that. Pneumothorax, tension pneumothorax.
Okay.
The other one is heat related. So you can imagine, obviously not Pittsburgh in December, but
Miami in September.
Yeah, at training camp, and I don't know if you took part in the marathon. Did you do any coverage of the marathon?
I did, because mile 21.2 was at the end of my driveway.
Okay.
So for 5 years, I would literally roll out of bed and roll down into my driveway, and because the tent was set up literally at the end of my driveway. So yes, I did marathon coverage every year that I was there, except maybe my intern year. So maybe cool. 4 out of the 5 years.
So at the finish line tent, we had dunking tanks for hyperthermia. And, we've had temperatures of 106, 107, 108. Every time we tell the story, the temperature keeps going up. Next year, they were 220 degrees. We were boiling water on them. But so, we set the same thing up at training camp, and at the stadium, we have these horse troughs that we can dump water and ice into, and we practice that.
So is it up to each team physician, the airway physician? I'm trying to get a grasp on sort of the hierarchy or the sort of organization of this thing. So you mentioned that the players union, they've got sort of a physician on there, and I'm guessing the NFL probably does, maybe
multiple. Yeah.
And then each team obviously takes care. Is there other than the airway physician, is it up to them to decide who and what they want on the sideline for the game, or is that dictated by the NFL? Like, big NFL saying, okay, you must have 3 orthopedics, a neurosurgeon, an airway doctor, and a paramedic, and you must have this equipment, and you must have these medications, or is that all up to you as the team physician or a member of that team to kind of decide what's going to be in the carts on the sideline or whatever? Or is it the same everywhere? So you could slide into a Ravens team someday and just, use their stuff. How does that all work?
Yeah. So with respect to the docs, they limit the number of docs. So they actually count heads from somewhere. And typically it's 2 orthopods. It's for the home team, 2 orthopods, a neurosurgeon, 1 or 2 sports medicine. They're on the sidelines. Up in the stands, there is a dentist, an ophthalmologist, and usually a sports medicine fellow. So they're there. On the sidelines, you have to have ALS equipment, but they don't necessarily say it has to be atropine, a defibrillator. That's would be one of the challenges if you were jumping around. Now, here we have 2 sets of ALS equipment on either sideline, and I saw something about AEDs. Each of the benches has an AED. The trainers are all EMTs, and at least that's the trend now, and at least in Pittsburgh, all 4 of them are EMTs, and the training that we do includes them, and so I'd be very confident if someone had a cardiac arrest that they would be on that person starting CPR with the AD on, and if it was at the training camp, calling 911.
Sure.
And then when do you get like an opportunity to drill this stuff?
So we do it usually before they leave for training camp. So we'll go down to the Steeler training facility, and sometimes we're lucky enough to grab a player, and other times, someone else. So the challenge is that, typically when you practice, you just find one of your colleagues to spine board. Well, none of our colleagues are 300 pounds and 6'8". And
yeah. So do you guys have some specialized? Do you have specialized equipment for this population you're serving?
So there's a longer spine board that they have on the field. The other thing we came up with, it's not that it's brilliant, is that we use a slider board. So, that used in a hospital. So we may put that, under the patient, under the player to slide them over. The other thing is, how do you get some 300-pound person onto a board? So you might first we the good news is that we can practice. So we'll roll them, slide just like you do normally. But we found it actually easier to do what was called an 8-person lift with 4 people on each side. It's actually a 9-person lift to lift them straight up a couple inches, then slide the board.
Slide it underneath.
Yeah. What?
Wow.
Yeah. What was cool is that in the training literature they had the 6-person lift, and we tried that. Ritu, you remember Paul Sable, the district
Yeah.
chief?
Yeah,
So-
I know. I remember him very well.
Yes, he luckily filled in, and he is pretty close to. And we could not lift him with 6 people, and we said screw that, and then we tried with 8 people, and it was fine.
Interesting. So, a couple of questions have popped up. I wanna pick the one that based on the topic we're talking about now, which is, we're actually part of our. When you pop back in, we were talking a little bit about our protocol group here, but one of the proposals is to remove all spine boards from our protocols. Probably not going to happen, but so with the de-emphasis of spine board use, it sounds like the NFL is still sort of in favor. And how much of the medical stuff is dictated by kind of NFL policy in that sort of situation?
Yeah, there was a big controversy because just as we were moving to not using spine boards and getting rid of the term spinal immobilization, the National Association of Athletic Trainers came out with something. The timing was just...
I was president of NAMSP.
Yes.
And yes, I remember that well.
The timing was horrible. To their credit, they went back and revised it fairly quickly. So we used the long board for patient movement at Pittsburgh EMS, and same with player movement.
And then the other and that's how we're training spine board now. Is it's a nice player movement player. It's a patient movement device. It's a transport device. It's not. I know some systems are actually using it as a movement device and then rolling the patient off the board when they get on a stretcher. We're not doing that. Once you're on a board, you're kind of stuck on a board. We are still having pushback from trauma. Our trauma surgeons and neurosurgeons, when patients are coming in not on a board. So I don't know that we'll ever get rid of the spine board, at least anytime soon. But we're really emphasizing it as a movement device. And I don't know how you're going to pick up a 300 Michigan has a defensive lineman who's 365 this year. So how you're going to pick up a 350-pound person without some kind of device, whether it's a scoop stretcher as at Zafran or spine board or whatever.
Go ahead. We tried the scoop, but in Pittsburgh, we don't use scoops. Why? I don't know. So it would be silly. The only time we use a scoop is on a Sunday in front of 50,000 people. So we don't.
Yeah.
And most of our scoops are rusted. So.
Somebody wanted to know, when there's a transport, does the airway dock right in? Do the medics take over from the field? What happens there?
So certainly if there's any concern about the airway, one of the docks would ride in. So we get to decide, does the airway dock go in or does the visiting team dock go in? So as you can imagine, we're taking the equipment with us and all our drugs. So we're lucky. We would just call the first aid room and tell the resident to bring down the stuff from the first aid room. But other places would need a double set.
And I think Pittsburgh's unique too because the physicians are so integrated with the EMS system. I don't think they've. I mean, again, it's been 25 years since I graduated, but I mean, to ride in the back of an ambulance and a critical patient, what happened every time I worked a EMS shift. So the medics were totally used to the doc riding in with them. Whereas like here in Portland, to have a doc in the back of the ambulance would be very rare. But it just, and I know you and Vince, I saw you sent me pictures of you and Vince and Mikey T. I mean, those are all docs that they're on a first name basis with all these medics. So I don't think it's a big issue or anything new to the medics to have the doc in the back with them.
Yeah, it's the question about the AED. That is an awesome question. So we're probably going to revisit that. So
Yeah,
for the
let's read the question just because this is a podcast too. But Ginger, I love you, Ginger. It's great that you're here. I haven't talked to you in a long time, so I miss you very much. Hopefully I will see you soon. But is it standard to bring the AED out on the field if there's an altered, unresponsive player, or only is it retrieved if somebody's like, oh my gosh, bring the AED?
Yeah, it wasn't 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, sure. I think I get that, right? Like,
yeah, in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh training staff is just fantastic. And so if the training staff goes out and there's a problem, then they'll signal for us to come out. And each team has different signals, and we have radios, but our signal is.
yeah. Please hurry. Please come out here.
Yeah. And with that, you would get an ALS cart and an ALS stretcher with defibrillators. But we're going to have to rethink, a player goes down. I'm always looking, are they moving? Are they grabbing their knee, their ankle? If they're not moving, then I just sort of drift in that direction. But should we be drifting with an AED? We need to think about that.
Well, one thing while you guys were having the discussion on the backboards and giant human beings and all that stuff, air medical, like it would be awfully hard to fit some of these people in a helicopter. So is air medical ever a consideration for you guys, or just going to go ground? Is that even a thing for you guys?
So it would be their training camp is in Latrobe, which is it's about a 45-minute drive. Oh, wow. And if God forbid there was a problem, the plan is to land the helicopter right on the field,
sure, and
squeeze that person in there.
I've heard stories of former athletes needing to be airlifted, and what didn't go exactly as planned, because it turns out they couldn't shut the back doors because he was literally 7 feet tall, and it just wasn't going to work. So, yeah.
Well, luckily NFL players aren't 7 feet tall.
Generally speaking,
it's
definitely
tough to get a low pad level when you're that tall.
Yeah,
and pad level is kind of everything.
Yeah, I would love to talk about sports equipment removal. It's one of those protocols that has sat. So I was a clinical leader for a long time, and it was this little protocol that sat in our book for, I don't know, forever. And thankfully there's none around me, or else I would knock on it. It didn't get employed very often, thankfully. So what is going to be, let's say you need to control somebody's airway. Are you taking face mask off? Are you taking helmet off, leaving shoulder pads on? This is something that you face every single game. where somebody might face something like this once in their career as a paramedic. So how are you determining what your plan of action is going to be? I'm sure you train on that, obviously.
Right. So it's a little easier for me because we run the show. But that's something, let's say you have a crew covering a high school football game. The crew needs to plan that out way before the game starts. So for the Steelers, if they're calling us out, then the face mask better be off. If we need to, obviously you can bag that way, but if there's any concern that we may have to do CPR or there's a chest injury, everything comes off. And I don't know if you've ever seen, an emergency department trying a trauma team take off equipment. It is a disaster. It's more trauma than so we have 4 trainers and a bunch of docs who've trained on how to get equipment off. And theoretically, what we would do is get all the equipment off before the person gets in the truck.
Yeah. So I'm assuming there must be obviously you're cutting stuff. There's probably a method to the order in which you would because I guess kind of what I'm getting at is we worked a lot at the fire department on getting firefighters out of their equipment, right? Like they come out of a structure fire, fall over into cardiac arrest. We got to get the pack off, the mask off, the turnout coat, all this kind of stuff. And you can't just sort of try to figure it out as you're going. So is there like a best practice on how to get somebody out of their uniform, so to speak?
Yeah, it's all done in concert. So the helmet and the shoulder pads would come off in the same sort of evolution. So you would cut the jersey in a T, cutting downward so you don't cut their face.
That's bad.
That's probably for a reason.
Hey, somebody thought of that. That's good.
Yes. Yeah. Then you would, depending on the shoulder pad, you need to either unstrap it or most often cut up the middle. More recently, the shoulder pads have this very heavy plastic in the middle. And if you try and cut it with trauma shears, it ain't going to happen. So we now carry tin snips or garden shears to cut up the middle. And then in a coordinated effort, you would first take the helmet off and then slightly raise up the player to pull off the shoulder pads.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if anyone watching has ever had to deal with that, but I think your assessment of kind of what a disaster it is and how the patient's worse off afterwards, after the sort of shit show removal that we're trying to do. That makes a lot of sense to me. So,
Ron, do you know if those big plastic pieces are on just sort of the NFL level equipment, or is that something we'll see more in high school?
Well, so that's interesting. So when we first started, the trainer would pull out 4 sets of helmets and 4 sets of shoulder pads, all different.
Right.
So I suspect as you go down, like to college and high school, there are more and more. The challenge, so we say you take off the face mask. Some are quick release, some are screws, and some of the trainers that work with like the high schools, if the helmets are old, the screws are rusted on. And
oh geez.
Yeah, it's more of a challenge. So we have it good, but the poor folks in high school or probably some college, a little more challenging. So you have to know what your players are wearing.
But that's very interesting because I mean, like a lot of my fire departments do standby at high school football and
Friday Night Lights.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so this idea that there could be a piece of plastic or something that you can't cut through is new to me. So that's actually something I'll take from this session to go back to my fire departments and say, hey, do we know what, if this is a possibility? So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else was I going to ask? So Ginger asked another question too about IO versus IV. In this in this setting, I'm assuming you're carrying just the full Pittsburgh EMS kit.
Yeah, we have everything.
So as far as, concussion protocols, people getting knocked in the head, things like that. Is this also an evolution over the last few years, having, somebody from neuro kind of on the sideline, be boxing around, waiting to go evaluate somebody? Is there a hierarchy of sort of assessment where maybe the trainers are going to do an initial sort of how you doing, and then sort of give us one of these, or how's that process work? I'm super curious about the whole, concussions and pulling players and all that kind of stuff.
So it's gone as before my time, but in the early days, no football players got concussions. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So you really didn't need anyone. Now it is incredibly scripted. So the other doctors on the field are what's called the unaffiliated neuroconsultants. And in Pittsburgh, it's a neurosurgeon on each sideline. It doesn't have to be a neurosurgeon on each sideline, and then one up in the booth. So the player can self-report and say, hey, I think I have my bell rung. The other thing that can happen is that someone up in the booth, and they tell us what to look for, but someone is slow to get up or stumbles. The spotter up in the booth can talk directly to the ref and say, player number 6, and they'll stop the game, and player number 6 will go off the field. You'll see that on each sideline there's a tent. So that person will be taken into that tent, and it'll typically be the unaffiliated neuroconsultant. If there's a neurosurgeon, they'd be in there, and a trainer. And there's a checklist they have to go through. If they pass the checklist, then they can go play again. If there's any concern on that checklist, then they have to go back to the locker room, get a more detailed neuro exam. And then they have to, if they pass that, they can play. If not, they're staying in the locker room.
Ron,
can I also assume that? I'm sorry. No, I was just
going to. Do you know if those checklists are published? Like, is that a tool that we could grab? Hi, Sheila. Oh, she waved back. Is that a tool that we could grab to implement, to put in our sports standby? Because unfortunately, in the community, sometimes, especially in smaller, more rural communities, they actually rely on the fire department to be that concussion evaluation person. They don't have trainers and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure you could Google it. It's probably more specific than you need.
Mm-hmm.
In non-competitive sports, if you go, I think that guy has a concussion, then he has a concussion.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
For high school, you're going to say, I think he has a concussion. He can't play. He'll get tested during the week and play again. Some of it's straightforward, and some of it is more subtle.
When my daughter she did dance in high school for quite a few years, and I think it was her senior year or junior year. Everyone had to get sort of this baseline beginning of the season neuro exam. That way, in case something did happen down the road, they had something to kind of compare, right? the baseline. There's a that occurs, which happened to my daughter. That's why this is all kind of fresh, although it was a couple years ago. So they do a baseline. At injury occurred, they do one probably sooner than later, and then they sort of repeat those. And they were able to kind of see that she was a little worse off than they actually thought because they did that. So is that something that occurs with NFL players as well? Is that just part of the NFL players? Yeah.
Yes. Pittsburgh was one of the places that actually started that, and there's several different versions, but yes. So almost every high school football player has as an initial, and then if they have a concussion, they can see how far they dipped, and before they can play again, they have to get back to normal.
Yeah, and I know there was a name. I don't remember what the name of the test. I know it was a standardized thing. I just don't remember what it was called, but yeah.
The other thing, what's neat is the NFL now has medical records that the NFL keeps. So if someone gets hurt, it's not like you scribble it on a terrible towel and keep it. It's all recorded. They are really, really interested in safety. It's a challenging game, but it's been a lot of changes, and it keeps changing.
I want to change gears a little bit, and to do this, I will tell you my story of when I was working at Three Rivers Stadium as the resident. And there are a few Three Rivers Stadium stories that I remember. One, just as an aside, was when I was on my EMS rotation, so I was the Jeep doc, and the Grateful Dead was in town.
Oh my, yes.
You remember, right? So
I was there. Oh.
Yes, I know you were there because I got a call from you saying, can you go pick up 30 more vials of droperidol and bring them to Three Rivers Stadium?
Yes.
Was that 3-0?
3-0. So I remember I drove because and I was driving around the outside of Three Rivers during that. I was on that whole week, and the camp, like, people started camping there like 3 or 4 days before. And I remember going through there a bunch of times, but I remember that being one of the craziest days.
Wow.
And I think I came in and helped you that day, but I remember you're like, can you go to Presby and pick up like 30 vials of droperidol? And so I remember going out and doing that and bringing that in and walking in and going, oh my God.
Yeah, so I got so frustrated because people were one guy just walked right off the second level, landed, he had bilateral broken tib fibs, and he goes, I refuse to go to the hospital. And you start out nice, oh, come on, you. And he goes, I absolutely refuse. You can't touch me. And he was obviously on something. I finally said, fine. If you can get up and walk, you can refuse. And he tried, and he goes, okay, I'll go with you. That was the last patient I saw in the evening, and I had it. Because he wasn't
a little crispy around the edges there that night.
Yeah.
He wasn't the first one that just walked off levels. I don't know what they were using, but just crazy.
But so when I was a resident and a fellow, we would get opportunities to go to Steeler games as the doc for the crowd for the first aid room. And we had a couple seats. I don't know if it is. We would sit in the seats, and then we would get paged if they needed us to come up. Most of the stuff was like Band-Aids and shit like that, and they didn't need us. But then they would page us if we needed to come up. And I was sitting at the game with Mark Shetzley, and Mark and I were just having a good old time. And I got the page, and it said 911. and I tell this story a fair amount, but so I go up there and there's a guy sitting. At the time, I don't know if they had these Chase lounges that the people would sit on when they came in if they weren't feeling well, and this guy was sitting on a Chase lounge. He was connected to the Life Pack 10, and you could see when I saw when I walked into the room the ST elevations, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, this guy's having a STEMI," and he kind of looks at me, and he just goes like this, and I don't know if I should name the medic. But a medic that we all know looked at the guy, looked at the monitor, looked at the guy, looked at the monitor. The monitor was in VF, grabbed the paddles because we had paddles back then, shocked him, and then put the paddles up and said, "Gel me." And I looked at him and I said, "Billy, you've already shocked him." And he shocked him back into sinus, and he was awake, and right away he was awake, and I rode in the back of the ambulance with him to Allegheny, and he looked at me in the back and he says, "My chest hurts." I'm like, "Well, you're having a heart attack." He says, "No, like the skin on my chest is." So, and that guy, I remember we called ahead and they took him to the cath lab. And he did really well. And they even did a story on the news. Mark was mad at me because they interviewed me. Mark's like, "I was there too." I'm like, "Sorry, Mark." So in terms of preparing to have 55, is that what Heinz Field holds now? Is about 50? Because Three Rivers was more like 70, right? I think like what goes into that sort of large mass gathering preparation from a Pittsburgh EMS standpoint?
Yeah, now it's turnkey. I suspect at some point we sat down and decided, but it involves both fixed post at the first aid rooms and then mobile medics on carts. And depending on the crowd, how many carts that are there, it is challenging. So if ideally you'd want to have enough people to get to a cardiac arrest within, let's say, 3 minutes. On the other hand, if there's 50,000 people there, they're not getting out of your way. So you're thinking about the ushers starting CPR, security starting CPR. We've had some incredible saves, though. We average a cardiac arrest every football game. It's just
wow,
easily.
No kidding,
easily. And
is it worse when the Steelers are bad?
Well, it did seem to be worse earlier in the season. But
one every football game. I had no idea. It didn't feel like that, 30 years ago.
Yeah, we had someone drop just as they left the stadium, and there just happened to be, I think, a Presby trauma surgeon there who started CPR. The medics were right there. They were in refractory VFib, went over to AGH, got on ECMO, and did fine. So
wow,
it's just.
Do you guys have mechanical CPR deployed in your system?
We have 3 devices, one on the dock Jeep, one on each rescue truck. But I don't think there's one at the stadium.
I was just wondering. I have 2 questions and I'll be tapped out. First one is you get to see, I know you're there for business, right? You're there to manage the health and wellness of the players and everyone that's on the field. But have you been starstruck yet by any player or celebrity that you've seen down on the field? And who?
Well, it is just so cool that sometimes I I have to pinch myself. I'm standing there, and right in front of me is TJ Watt, who's giant, and I can't see shit. And I want to go up to him and say, "Hey, dude, sure."
Down in front.
But obviously, I don't. And it's been cool. The problem is that I don't get to really interact with a lot of the players unless I go to the hospital with them. And it just seems to turn out every player that I've had a relationship with, they say, "Hey, Ron, how are you?" They get traded. So
please
just keep your
don't say
mouth
hi to
shut
Kenny
now.
Pickett.
So
Do not
Right,
become
everybody.
friends with Kenny Pickett.
but there's one coach who had a medical event who's now my best friend forever, and it's cool.
That's pretty awesome.
I know. Was there a difference being on the sideline this past weekend after what happened last weekend?
Yes, because anytime a player went down, the stadium got quiet. Every player kneeled down. I'm going, "Oh no, please no, please no. Please grab your knee, please." And luckily, each time they would help the person up, and they would. But you could tell that everyone was on eggshells, and like someone sprains an ankle and they're laying down there perfectly quiet, and
Yeah.
you're just hoping to see them move. And
Any feedback from anybody say, "Hey, thank you"?
well, what was interesting is that I mentioned before the game, we have the 60-minute pre meeting. And typically the ref comes out and says, "Don't run out on the field. If you see something, let me know." This time, all the refs came out and they said, and EMS, they said, "I want to thank all of you for what you do. You're the unsung heroes." They looked at the EMS providers, they looked at us, and it was very touching that all of them came out and they specifically did that and looked at our medics and said, "Thank you." And it was very nice.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. So my last question is, what has been the coolest thing? You probably already mentioned it a little bit. So you've been doing this a long time. You've got to see a lot of stuff. What has been some of the best sort of advances in some of the medicine that you've seen happen on the sideline? Like what's been like, I mean, I think for us in the field, there's been a lot of cool things that we've been able to do over the last 25, 30 years, right? So 12 leads, CPAP, whatever it happens to be. I'm assuming there's some kind of journey that sort of the sports medicine pieces has sort of been this whole time. What's the list thing you've seen from your perspective been doing this?
Yeah, it's actually less emergency medicine, although it could be, but the introduction of ultrasound. So, you have that player who has some belly pain.
Yeah.
Our sports medicine doc is an incredible ultrasonographer. I'll say, throw it on his belly. You're going to you're debating whether or not you're going to send him for a CT scan.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can imagine that once, does he have a pneumothorax? So it hasn't reached perfection yet, but I can imagine that in the future, probably in some places they have it now.
For sure. Yeah.
The emergency doc is going to have a video laryngoscope and an ultrasound.
Yeah, I know. Well, anyway, I was going to get off track and talk about it. One of my old medical directors probably has a video laryngoscope on his belt. But I won't go.
Yeah.
I know he does. I know because I was there when he bought it.
3-pager.
Bought it from the rep. Yeah. Anyway, well, cool. That's what I got. Ritu, bring us home, baby. What else you got? I mean, I could talk for hours, but it's already been an hour and 15 minutes. I want respectful.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's, again, Ron, you've been, when way back when I was an intern and a resident, and I was like, what do I want to do with my life? And boy, the CMS thing seems really cool, and I want to be involved. And you've been there from the beginning. So I just really appreciate, I feel like I've learned so much from you over the years. I learned about prior, dispatch, and I remember, that was the other piece before, 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 I learned a lot about dispatch from you. So again, you're one of the nicest, humblest guys I know, but in terms of like your impact on EMS and emergency medicine, I think there are very few people in our entire profession who've had the impact that you've had. So I appreciate that, and I'm just so excited to that you came on, and also really looking forward to seeing you and Sheila in a couple weeks. And then Pittsburgh is a magic place. Pittsburgh, 1 out of 3 NAMSP presidents is a Pittsburgh grad,
and all the good ones were.
Yeah. Just the idea that the physicians could be so well integrated and be team members and teammates with the paramedics. That's where I fell in love with EMS, and that's where I fell in love with working with paramedics. I mean, I wouldn't love people like Mike as much as I do, I don't think, if I hadn't been in Pittsburgh, because I think that the best part of my job as an EMS medical director is to work with paramedics, because they work hard and they care and they make a huge difference. And those are the values that you've instilled in me, Ron. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all our paramedics, because obviously, I'm sure the first day you were on the Jeep, you were scared.
Terrified.
And you were out with medics who had been training docs for maybe 10 years by then. Now it's 30 years. And it's a credit to them.
Yep, absolutely.
Indeed. Awesome. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll get us out of here. Thanks for a great show.
Great.
Awesome.
My pleasure.
Yeah. On behalf of Dr. Ritu Sani, Dr. Ron Roth, Mike Verkess, you've been watching and listening to the EMS show. It's great to see you. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with us. We will get this podcast published shortly, and we will see you on the next one. If you have any questions that you forgot or whatever, throw them in the chat. Now, it turns out we can get those answered for you. So anyway, that's it. Have a great night, everybody, and we will see you later.
Good night.
Hey, thanks for listening to the EMS show. Let's continue this conversation. What do you say? Check out the official Facebook page and Twitter feed. The EMS show is a fire